I Will Marry When I Want is a play by the Kenyan playwrights Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Ngũgĩ wa Mirii, published in the Gĩkũyũ language with the title Ngaahika Ndeenda in 1986 and first performed in 1977 at the Kamiriithu Community Education and Cultural Center, an open-air theater in Limuru, Kenya. This African literature is part of the Heinemann African writers' literary period and is a post-colonial social realism drama that is set in the 1970s post-independence Kenya. I Will Marry When I Want criticizes the economic policies of Kenya's post-independence leaders, exposing their exploitation of poor peasants and workers. Because of this political critique, the play was banned, and Ngũgĩ was imprisoned from 1977 to 1979. Mau Mau movement was a Kenyan armed resistance group formed by the Gĩkũyũ people in the early 1950s to reclaim land and freedom from British rule. Rumors of their activities began spreading in 1951, including stories of the loyalty oath and forest meetings outside Nairobi. In 1952, Mau Mau fighters began burning the homes of Africans who refused to join them, prompting the colonial government to impose curfews. Senior Chief Waruhiu was assassinated in October 1952. The British government responded by sending more troops and declaring a state of emergency. Mau Mau was labeled a terrorist organization, and over 500 suspected members were arrested. Schools closed, and Jomo Kenyatta, president of the Kenya African Union, was detained for allegedly supporting the movement. By late 1952, the Mau Mau openly rebelled against the British. Governor-General Sir Evelyn Baring ordered the execution of anyone administering Mau Mau oaths. Some settler Europeans formed militia groups like the commando units to fight the rebels. In 1953, Mau Mau rebels killed 19 Home Guard members, and in response, the British isolated Kikuyu lands and continued mass arrests. In 1954 alone, more than 40,000 Kikuyu were detained. Some Mau Mau leaders, including General China, were captured, and the British pressured them to urge others to surrender, but the resistance continued. In 1955, the British offered amnesty to Mau Mau fighters, but many ignored it and continued their attacks. The violence intensified, leading to revocation of amnesty, executions, and detentions. By 1959, the state of emergency was lifted as the rebellion was largely suppressed. Political negotiations began, and African nationalists demanded the release of Jomo Kenyatta as a condition for cooperation. Kenyatta was freed on July 14, 1961, became Prime Minister in 1963. Kenya gained independence in December 1963. Jomo Kenyatta became the first president of the Republic of Kenya in 1964. The Mau Mau were granted amnesty, but they remained banned until 2003. In 2006, former Mau Mau fighters sued the British government for torture and abuse in detention camps. The play uses flashbacks to recall the Mau Mau revolution, which accelerated Kenya's struggle for independence from British colonial rule. Throughout the play, characters refer to taking secret oaths promising not to betray fellow Mau Mau fighters to the British or sell African land to Europeans. Kigunda remembers courting Wangeci long before the state of emergency, referring to the period between 1952 and 1962 when the British formed the Home Guard to suppress the Mau Mau uprising and detain thousands of suspected rebels. The play honors Mau Mau heroes like Dedan Kimathi, who is praised in songs, and contrasts their sacrifice with the corruption of the Home Guard, portrayed as traitors who rose to power through deceit. Act 1 begins in the small, one-room hut of Kigunda, his wife Wangeci, and their teenage daughter Githoni. Their poverty is immediately visible, old coats hang in tatters on the wall, and a worn-sheathed sword hangs above their bed, hinting at Kigunda's past as a freedom fighter. Wangeci peels potatoes, Kigunda repairs a broken chair, and Githoni combs her hair as they prepare for guests. Kigunda keeps staring proudly at the title deed to his 1.5-acre plot of land. When Wangeci asks why he is always looking at it, he insists that his small piece of land is more valuable to him than the thousands of acres owned by the wealthy Ahab Kiwe wa Kinoru. Wangeci worries whether the chair will be fixed in time before the visitors arrive, but Kigunda jokes about making Mr. Kiwe and his wife Jezebel sit on the floor. A drunk man passes by and calls out to Kigunda for a drink. Angry, Wangeci shouts at him for urinating near their home, but Kigunda defends him, saying that man called Commando Wamunu used to be an administrative policeman and later a night watchman at Ahab Kiwe's company Securicur. He became a drunk after poverty ruined his life. He reminds his wife that poverty can destroy anyone, wisely saying, "Poverty has no heroes. He who judges knows not how he will be judged." Music is then heard outside, and a group of singers enters. Their song speaks about the Satan of poverty, as well as the evils of robbery, theft, and oppression that must be defeated. Their leader explains that they are members of a new sect of the poor. Those without land, those without plots, those without clothes. They are collecting donations to put up our own church. Kigunda angrily throws them out of his hut, complaining to Wangisi that religion has made people blind. He mocks the growing number of churches and asks bitterly, "Are we the rubbish heap of religions?" So that wherever the religions are collected, they are thrown in our courtyard? Annoyed but amused, Kigunda imitates the religious singers, and Wangisi compliments his strong voice, but this reminder of his past makes him serious. He asks if she remembers that he used to dance the traditional Mukongwa dance before the state of emergency. He calls Gathoni to bring his sword so he can show them. Lost in memory, he begins to sing and reenact the dance. Dancers appear on stage as he sings about climbing mountains, sleeping in a maiden's bed, remembering his mother, and fighting to reclaim victory from traitors and return it to patriots. Dancers exit when Wangisi mocks his nostalgia and orders him to finish repairing the chair. Irritated, he goes back to work. Wangisi then wonders why wealthy people like Mr. Kiwe and Jezebel would want to visit their poor home. Kigunda rejects her description of them as poor and proudly insists that he is not poor as long as he owns land. He reminds her that people like him, through their labor and sweat, are the ones who make rich men wealthy. Wangisi tells Kigunda to focus on fixing the bed frame. She then scolds Gathoni for sitting idle and tells her to help peel potatoes. Gathoni argues that she has already swept the floor, but Wangisi points to a pile of messy bedding and accuses her of being lazy. Annoyed, Gathoni retorts that those are not proper bedclothes. Wangisi snaps that if she thinks she is too grown up to work at home, then she should get married. Gathoni angrily accuses her mother of treating her like a servant while spending everything on her son's school fees. Wangisi tells her she can leave if she wants, but warns that no woman wants to grow old unmarried. Defiant, Gathoni says, "I shall marry when I want. Nobody will force me into it." An angry Wangisi sends her out of the house. Kigunda also rebukes Gathoni for being disrespectful. After she leaves, Wangisi sighs that when children get to that age, we can only watch them and hope for the best. Kigunda wonders if modern girls marry anymore, or if they spend their time in bars looking for rich older men. When Gathoni returns, Wangisi sends her again to borrow salt from a neighbor. She asks Kigunda for some money, but he reminds her that he already gave her everything he had. Frustrated, he complains about inflation and that life used to be cheaper. Wangisi responds sarcastically, "The difference between then and now is this. We now have our independence." Kigunda argues that African employers exploit workers like the Indian traders and white settlers did before independence. When Gathoni returns with the salt, a car horn honks outside and she runs out excitedly. Her parents suspect she has become worse ever since Kiwe's son started showing interest in her. Wangisi suddenly wonders if that is why Mr. Kiwe and Jezebel want to visit them. Then Kigunda and Wangisi reminisce fondly about their youth and courtship before the state of emergency during colonial rule. Music begins in the background as dancers silently appear on stage to represent their memories. Kigunda sings about Wangisi's beauty, and they recall dancing the Mwomboko dance, promising to love and take care of each other. The music fades and the dancers leave, and the couple falls silent. Then Kigunda remembers that 7 years after their marriage, people began speaking of freedom for Kenya. Wangisi recalls the Olengiruini women were forced off their land but refused to give up hope. A group of women enter the stage singing praise for these brave women and then exit. Kigunda remembers the horrors of the state of emergency: homes burned, people arrested and detained, women assaulted, and men tortured and mutilated. But he proudly says that in the end, the British were defeated and Kenya achieved freedom. A procession of people enter the stage carrying the Kenyan flag and singing patriotic songs before disappearing again. Kigunda reflects that it has now been more than 10 years since independence, but he is still a poor laborer and Wangisi has grown old and tired. Wangisi replies that women lose their beauty after years of hard work and childbirth. She changes the subject and wonders why Mr. Kiwe and his family want to visit. Kigunda guesses they might want to tell them to keep Gathoni away from their son. Suddenly he remembers a letter he received and explains that Kiwe's wealthy business partner Akua Wandidika wrote to him about a foreign company, owned by Americans, Germans, and Japanese, that wants to build a factory making insecticide for killing bedbugs. They want to buy Kigunda's land because it is flat, dry, and close to the railway line. He assumes this is what Mr. Kiwe wants to discuss. Wangisi angrily says the real bedbugs are wealthy men who steal land from the poor and sell it to foreigners. Then Jakamba, Kigunda's neighbor and factory worker, and his wife Njuki, enter asking for food. Ngũgĩ asks Wanjisi why such rich people would want to visit poor workers like them. Wanjisi replies that she does not know. Ngũgĩ warns her to keep Githoni away from Kiwe's son because rich people do not mix with the poor. Gikamba says he is unhappy at work because wages can never equal the work done. Wages can never really compensate for your labor. He argues that factory owners only know how to exploit laborers, take away their rights, and profit from their suffering. He passionately describes his daily life at the factory. He says the company has become like a god to him because it controls his entire life. He wakes before sunrise, works hard at the machines, takes only a short break, and then works again until evening. This is his routine every day of every week. He earns money, but the real profits are sent back to Europe. He rarely sees his family and is always exhausted. He mentions a man he once knew who went insane from inhaling chemical dust at the factory. The factory destroyed their forests, took their land, used their natural resources, and exploited their animals and men. The Europeans collected all the wealth to develop their own countries, leaving the local people poor. If the profits stayed in Kenya, they would have good schools and proper houses for workers and peasants, but now many people have no clothes and shelter. He warns them that the rich in the country still depend on the labor of the poor. He criticizes the luxury of the rich, but Wanjisi interrupts to say at least Kenya gained independence. Gikamba argues that the factory brings sickness and pollution to the land. Kigunda admits he never knew industrial workers suffered so much. Gikamba explains that the industries exploit workers by paying low wages and selling goods at high prices. Ngũgĩ reminds him that he was beaten the day before and warns that his dangerous talk could get people killed. Wanjisi also says that this sounds like the same complaints people once made against the white colonizers. Suddenly, there is a knock at the door. Kiwe and his wife Jezebel enter, dressed in expensive clothes. Ndujire and his wife Helen follow them in. There are not enough seats, and in the confusion someone knocks down Kigunda's framed title deed. Gikamba hangs it back on the wall, and then he and Ngũgĩ leave. Kiwe and Jezebel sit on the chairs while Ndujire and Helen sit on the bed. Wanjisi begins preparing food for her rich visitors. Kiwe mentions a tractor driver on his farm. Jezebel praises the driver, saying he is a mature man because he never complains or asks for higher pay. He thanks God and works hard. Wanjisi brings out food, but Jezebel refuses to eat, saying she is not hungry. Wanjisi insists she must at least have a taste. Helen then prays a long, dramatic prayer, asking God to remove evil from the land and make everyone content with what they have. Kiwe introduces Ndujire as his Christian brother. Ndujire used to be a home guard who killed people during the emergency, but after finding Christ, his business succeeded and he got a loan. Kigunda and Wanjisi are amazed as the visitors sing a Christian hymn about God's protection. Kigunda interrupts demands to know what they really want. Jezebel is so startled she falls off her chair. Helen helps her up, and Wanjisi tries to calm everyone by making tea, but she discovers they have no tea leaves left. Kiwe explains that God sent them to ask Kigunda and Wanjisi to join the church. They must be baptized and have a proper Christian wedding. Kigunda and Wanjisi are shocked when they are told their children are born in sin since their traditional marriage is not recognized by the church. A furious Kigunda shouts angrily. As the guests try to leave, he grabs his sword and declares that Wanjisi is already his wife, and that he paid full bride wealth for her according to tradition. Terrified, everyone runs away as Kigunda laughs wildly. Wanjisi is worried that his outburst may cost him his job. Githoni enters, wearing new clothes and shoes. She proudly says that John Muhuni, Kiwe's son, bought them for her. Her parents accuse her of dressing like a prostitute. Githoni tells them John has invited her to Mombasa. Kigunda warns her that if she leaves, she should never return. Githoni says goodbye and walks out. Wanjisi tells Kigunda that maybe the real reason the rich visitors wanted them to have a church wedding was so John and Githoni could marry. She notes that they said nothing about the insecticide factory or warning Githoni to stay away from their son. Kigunda begins to agree with her. Act 2 Scene 1 begins days later with Kigunda, Wanjisi, Gikamba, and Ngũgĩ sitting together in their hut. The women are shelling maize as night falls. Gikamba warns them not to trust Kiwe and his family, reminding them that Kiwe never actually said his son wanted to marry Githoni. Ngũgĩ adds that the rich only care about exploiting the poor. Gikamba criticizes foreign religions brought by the colonizers. When Kenyans tithe, the money goes overseas, and then Europeans send a little back and pretend it is charity. The white colonizers used religion to trick Africans while mapping and grabbing our land. They taught people not to care about material things so they could steal from them more easily. Gikamba and Ngũgĩ sing a mocking song that people are told to rely on God instead of fighting for their basic needs. Gikamba reminds them of the freedom struggle during colonial times. He recalls that religious leaders tried to convince rebels to surrender. He tells the story of a hero, the son of Mirii, who was being hanged but refused to betray his people. He spat in the priest's face. The group sings together about never betraying their land. Gikamba argues that the same colonial church exists today. Ngũgĩ says the church now uses different songs, but Gikamba insists it has the same message. They sing another song that mocks church teachings. Ngũgĩ holds up Kigunda's land title deed and sarcastically says people are told not to care about worldly things. She mocks the idea that the poor should be happy when they are hungry. She puts the title deed back in jokes by pretending to have the big belly of a wealthy man. Gikamba angrily asks why Kiwe didn't visit them to offer better wages or more land. He says, religion is the alcohol of the soul. Religion is the poison of the mind. He complains that while the poor work hard, the rich and foreigners take everything. Kigunda replies that he is not interested in joining the church but doesn't want to ruin his daughter's future, so maybe it would be better to have their marriage blessed. Gikamba insists that a marriage is already blessed if bride wealth has been paid and the traditional ceremony, endurario, has been performed. Ngũgĩ says that today people think marriage is only about property joining with property. Ngũgĩ argues that if you are not baptized, no one will say prayers over your body after you die. Gikamba responds that rich people are not very religious either, but they get big funerals. The play shifts to a memory of Gikamba and Ngũgĩ's wedding. Women enter singing and exchanging gifts. The bride's clan, the Agasaku, sing that they are not giving their daughter away for wealth, but so she will have enough to eat. The groom's clan, the Ombwe, sing that they want a woman who will fill my granary with millet grains. The women ululate, and the couple are joined together. Everyone sings about returning to resist the white colonizers. The dancers and singers leave. Then Gikamba explains that soon after, the colonial government banned dancing, singing, and gatherings of more than 5 people. People continued to meet secretly during the general strike of 1948. There is a flashback showing workers taking an oath, swearing loyalty to the movement. They promise never to betray their land or each other and to fight until freedom. They perform military drills and sing about going to war proudly. Gikamba recalls joining the Mau Mau fighters in the mountains. A battle is shown between the Mau Mau and the British soldiers. The Mau Mau kill a few soldiers and celebrate. Gikamba returns to the present, saying they won freedom with their blood and that blood is sacred when people share equally and do not discriminate. Suddenly, Ngũgĩ stands and angrily says she doesn't care whether Gathoni marries the rich man or not, as long as her daughter lives a better life. Before he and his wife left, Gikamba says he only spoke the truth and told them to think about his words. Kigunda says Gikamba's words affected him. But Ngũgĩ is angry and insists their daughter will suffer if she doesn't marry well. She says radicals like him are jealous and bitter. She grabs the title deed and says they must go to Kiwe tomorrow and tell him they accept his proposal. She says Kiwe is respectable and trustworthy. Her words influence Kigunda, and he decides they will go in the morning. In scene 2, Jezebel, Helen, and Ndujire are seated at the dining table at Kiwe's luxurious home in the evening. Nearby, Kiwe is talking with Akua wa Ndidika. Jezebel politely asks Ndidika to stay for dinner, but he says he must leave because his driver is waiting with his Range Rover. Before leaving, he reminds Kiwe about their plan for the insecticide factory. They must buy land from a poor man so no important people will object. He also stresses the importance of the factory's location to be distant from where important people live because it will produce toxic emissions. Jezebel criticizes him for speaking so openly about such things, but Ndidika laughs it off. He jokes about marrying a third wife and leaves. After he goes, Ndujire asks if Kiwe's son John has returned from Mombasa. Kiwe says no, and proudly talks about the hotel he wants to build there. Tourism is growing in Kenya, so he sees it as a good business opportunity. He also complains that workers are greedy, always asking for higher pay or loans, comparing them to monsters with 2 hungry mouths. Jezebel adds that workers have too many children and refuse to visit family planning clinics. Poor people complain because they are not good Christians and do not accept the life God gave them. Many of them are illiterate, and Kiwe says their churches used to hide Mau Mau rebels. Ndujire nervously asks if Kigunda was part of Mau Mau, but Kiwe says no. Kigunda is obedient, respected, and feared by other workers, so it's important to convert him into a good Christian. Then, someone knocks on the door. Everyone looks frightened, thinking perhaps Mau Mau rebels have come. But they relax when they see only Kigunda and Wanjisi. They explain they came to talk, but Kyoe says they will eat first. A servant walks by carrying tea, and Wanjisi reaches out for a cup, but the servant quickly pulls it away from her. Wanjisi feels insulted. Jezebel coldly explains that they only serve food to invited guests. Kigunda calmly says they did not come for food anyway. Water is a bigger problem for them now because their area has dried up. Jezebel tells a servant to go fetch water for them from a drum near the pigsty outside. Meanwhile, Ndujire cluelessly keeps talking about how he drinks a lot of water for his health. Jezebel prays, "Let's now say a prayer to thank God for the food we have just eaten." Kyoe asks why Kigunda has come, and Kigunda says they agree with what was said earlier about the wedding. The rich couples cheer and clap. But Kigunda says they cannot afford a church wedding. The rich couples laugh and say a wedding isn't that expensive. All they need are a few things: payment for the priest, a bridal gown and groom's suit, clothes for the wedding party, food, drinks, wedding cake, rings, flowers, and decorations. Wanjisi asks how they are supposed to pay for all of this. Kyoe seems confused and says he thought Kigunda earns a lot of money. Kigunda replies that 200 shillings a month is not much at all, when they must pay for food, clothes, and water. Kyoe responds that only he and the tractor driver make that much, and the tractor driver never complains. Kigunda says he does not want a loan but a solution to pay for the wedding. Kyoe insists he is already wealthy because he has a job and land. Many people would envy that. Then the rich couples begin talking about China, saying China gives everything for free but is an ungodly nation because it got rid of rich people. They say Kenya is blessed because it is a Christian country. Finally, Kyoe offers two solutions. First, Kigunda could sell his land to the insecticide company. Kigunda immediately refuses, he will never sell his land. Slightly annoyed, Kyoe offers his second idea: Kigunda should take a bank loan. Kyoe proudly says he is a director of the bank and will personally guarantee the loan. Helen and Ndujire praise him for being so generous. Kigunda agrees and says they can go now to arrange it. He says his land title deed will be used as security for the loan. Scene 1 of Act 3 opens in Kigunda's house, which now has new furniture and decorations, and instead of the land title deed hanging on the wall, there is now a religious poster. Kigunda and Wanjisi are excited as they prepare for their upcoming church wedding. They try on their new wedding clothes and admire each other. They begin to playfully act out their wedding, pretending to walk down the aisle, exchanging fake rings, and joking about people who give long emotional speeches at weddings. They wonder what expensive gift the wealthy Kyoe family will give them. Suddenly, their daughter Gathoni runs into the house, crying in despair. She reveals that John, Kyoe's son, has abandoned her after finding out she is pregnant. Kigunda furiously shouts that he had warned her not to go to Mombasa, but Wanjisi calmly suggests they should go talk to Kyoe. She believes Kyoe is a good Christian man and will surely insist that the children get married now. In Scene 2, at Kyoe's home, Kyoe and Akua are counting stacks of money and writing checks. Akua mentions he has to meet some foreign investors at the airport and casually says another poor man has already sold his land so the insecticide factory can expand. He assumes Kigunda will have to sell his land eventually too. After Akua leaves, Kigunda and Wanjisi enter, wearing their old, ordinary clothes again. They tell Kyoe about John leaving Gathoni after making her pregnant. Instead of showing concern, Kyoe becomes angry and insults Gathoni, calling her a prostitute, while claiming his son John is a moral and religious young man. Hurt, Kigunda threatens to take the matter to court, but Kyoe laughs and says the law will never side with a poor man. Enraged, Kigunda pulls out his sword and declares that this weapon is the poor man's law and justice. He forces Kyoe to kneel and threatens him, but says he won't kill him. He wants him to sign a written agreement. He swears that he would rather die than let his daughter marry Kyoe's son now. At that moment, a watchman and the Ndujires enter. The watchman blows his whistle in alarm, and Jezebel rushes in holding a gun. As Kigunda tries to leave, he looks back toward his sword, and Jezebel shoots him. He falls to the ground. In Scene 3 begins after 2 weeks at Kigunda's hut. Wanjisi is sitting with Njuki and Jakamba. Most of the expensive new furniture is gone, and the title deed is still missing from the wall. Wanjisi cries, saying her daughter Gathoni has gone to work as a barmaid, and Kigunda has become a drunk. Jakamba comfortingly says Gathoni should not be judged harshly. Women have suffered a lot in society and fought in the struggle for independence. Wanjisi mourns the loss of their land. Her friends are shocked, so she explains that the bank took their land because they could not repay the wedding loan. It was auctioned off earlier that same day. Suddenly, a drunk Kigunda stumbles in. He and Wangisi start blaming each other. She says the bank loan was his idea. He shouts that she was the one who insisted on a church wedding because she wanted to act like the rich and reject their traditional culture. They nearly start fighting, but their friends separate them and remind them that poor people should not fight among themselves. Kigunda agrees and says their real enemy is Kioi. He reveals that Kioi secretly bought their land. When Kigunda went to visit it one last time, he saw Kioi there with some white men, and they laughed at him. Then the same group of singers from Akdai enters. They sing about defeating the rich thieves who oppress the poor. Their leader asks for contributions to build a church, and Wangisi donates money. They sing songs of hope and harvest. Jakamba gives a long speech that Kenya went wrong when people abandoned the values of unity and turned to greed. Africans now help foreigners exploit their own people, and both the government and church have betrayed the poor. He insists that workers and peasants must unite in patriotic love and fight against oppression. The chorus repeats his words like a vow. The act ends with a song declaring that the trumpet of the poor has been blown, they are ready to rise, unite, and fight for justice. Let's thematically analyze the play. I Will Marry When I Want by Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Ngugi wa Mirii exposes the class tensions in post-colonial Kenya between the working-class peasants and the emerging local elite. These elites, aligned with Europeans, mirror the exploitative dynamics of colonialism. They are shown as greedy, ignorant, and detached from the struggles of ordinary people. By embracing Western religion and values, they distance themselves from their roots and exploit the proletariat who gained little after independence. Wangisi criticizes this privileged class. Aren't they the real bedbugs, local watchmen for the foreign robbers? When they see a poor man's property, their mouths water. When they get their own, their mouths dry up. Don't they have any lands they can share with these foreigners whom they have invited back into the country to desecrate the land? Once a Mau Mau rebel, Kigunda now owns a small piece of land but can barely afford basic necessities for his family. His daughter's failed marriage proposal highlights the growing class divisions and the impact of religious change. Jakamba, a labor activist, represents the workers' struggle. Jakamba compares the relationship between rich and poor to a cat and mouse chase, while Njuki warns Kigunda and Wangisi that the social gap is too wide to bridge, hence Gathoni could never realistically marry John, the rich man's son. Jakamba also questioned why Kioi and Jezebel spoke only about religion in weddings rather than addressing workers' needs, such as wage increases. When Kioi suggests a formal wedding for Kigunda and Wangisi, though they can't afford it and don't see its necessity. Kioi's claim that Kigunda earns a lot of money and how many thousands who in Kenya today cannot boast about a space large enough for a grave even, is a manipulative distortion of reality, revealing that the rich dismiss the poor's suffering. This insensitivity is further seen during a dinner conversation about water. When Kigunda and Wangisi complain about water shortages, Dujair smugly talks about how much water he drinks, an insult that indicates class arrogance. By the end, the working class prepares for another uprising, this time for economic equality, not political independence. After being humiliated by Kioi and his wife, losing their land, Gathoni's rejection, and being mocked and shot, Kigunda and Wangisi finally recognize the truth of Jakamba's words and join him and Njuki in their revolutionary fight. Jakamba's passionate speeches recall the unity of the Mau Mau struggle and emphasize that the next revolution must target Kenya's corrupt elite and foreign exploiters. The ending suggests hope that the oppressed can reclaim their dignity and freedom through collective resistance. The new Kenyan elite betrays the Africans through their adoption of Western religion and Christian names. The naming of Kiwe's wife as Jezebel recalls the biblical queen who killed Naboth so her husband, King Ahab, could seize his vineyard. Similarly, in the play, Jezebel saves her husband Ahab Kiwe by drawing a gun on Kigunda. Her weapon, a symbol of Western modernity, contrasts with Kigunda's traditional sword, an heirloom from the Mau Mau struggle. This contrast shows that elites have absorbed foreign culture while ordinary people cling to their indigenous past. The conversion to Christianity is a form of cultural treason, a rejection of African traditions and an acceptance of foreign domination. When Kigunda and Wangisi imagine their Christian wedding and renames themselves as Winston Smith Kigunda and Rosemary Magdalene Wangisi, the forced renaming marks the erasure of their original identity and the penetration of Western ideology into the African consciousness. The British may have left, but their religious influence remains strong. Kigunda questions, are we the rubbish heap of religions? So that wherever the religions are collected, they are thrown in our courtyard, and religions in this village will drive us all crazy, night and day. Jakamba reminds others that missionaries came before soldiers, using religion to pacify Africans while Europeans seized their land. He criticizes the colonial church for encouraging submission, preaching about heaven to distract the poor from their earthly suffering. Religion has become an opiate that keeps people from questioning injustice and allows the rich, like Kioi, to thrive unchallenged. Jakamba also points out that, during the Mau Mau Rebellion, many Christian Kenyans sided with the colonizers and urged others to surrender, confess the oath rather than fight for independence. This betrayal continues in the post-colonial era. The church now helps maintain the same social inequalities. Kioi, Jezebel, Ndujire, and Helen claim to be Christians but ignore Christ's teachings on humility and compassion. Instead, they interpret their wealth and privilege as signs of divine favor. Religion becomes a mask for hypocrisy and moral blindness. Jezebel ignores the suffering of the poor and still prays, "Let's now say a prayer to thank God for the food we have just eaten," after refusing to share it with Kigunda and Ngũgĩ. This prayer dictates the elite's selfishness and spiritual emptiness. When Jakamba and Ngũgĩ visit Kigunda's home, the women's conversation begins with trivial matters and is soon cut short so the men can discuss serious issues. Although Ngũgĩ is portrayed as intelligent and more politically aware, she is made to appear foolish when she criticizes Jakamba for being outspoken. This moment exposes how women's voices are sidelined within revolutionary discourse. Jakamba acknowledges the importance of gender equality for Kenya's progress. But the women are mostly silent or given minor roles. Gathoni, who could represent new possibilities for women, disappears by the end of the play, symbolizing that female agency is excluded from the family and the nation. Ngũgĩ represents traditional values and the practical side of peasant life. She is more realistic than Kigunda, whom she accuses of living in the past and glorifying his Mau Mau days. The difference between then and now is this: she tells him, "We now have our independence." But she remains unaware of the larger class struggle that Jakamba articulates. The elite women, like Jezebel, embody another form of oppression, internalized colonialism and moral hypocrisy. Jezebel, fully westernized and Christian, reinforces the double standards surrounding Gathoni's pregnancy. Her condemnation of Gathoni exposes how women themselves sometimes perpetuate patriarchal norms. Independence has not transformed gender relations. Women remain confined to domestic or symbolic roles, and their attempts at independence are punished or dismissed. Gathoni's tragedy, the loss of her reputation and future, highlights that little has changed for women in supposedly free Kenya. The play contrasts traditional Kenyan culture with Western culture, presenting the latter as foreign, shallow, and corrupting. Kigunda criticizes the spread of Western ideas about religion, marriage, land, and work. In contrast, Kioi and the Kenyan elite deliberately reject their roots and adopt Western customs to gain wealth and power. The contrast between the two marriage ceremonies, Kigunda's humble, traditional one and the elite's lavish Christian wedding, expresses this divide. Kenyan traditions are shown as more genuine and grounded, while Western customs appear hollow and shallow. A generational gap deepens this conflict. Younger Kenyans, born after independence, eagerly embrace modern lifestyles, while their parents remain doubtful, viewing modernity as another form of colonial influence. Kigunda's complaint about his daughter, "It's all the modern children. They have no manners at all," reflects this unease. Gathoni embodies this new generation. She wants to make her own choices, buy modern clothes, and decide when and whom to marry. Her defiance hints at a grasp for autonomy: "I shall marry when I want. Nobody will force me into it." Despite her modern outlook, she is ultimately betrayed by her lover when she becomes pregnant, revealing that his modern views are only superficial. To her parents, Gathoni's independence and behavior reflect the decline of moral and cultural values under Western influence. Kigunda and Ngũgĩ lament her lack of discipline and modesty, seeing her as a product of a misguided, modern age. However, Ngũgĩ also shows some understanding, admitting that this rebelliousness is part of youth. The conversion to Christianity is another site of tension between old and new. It represents social pressure. The demand to hold costly church weddings becomes the cause of Kigunda's downfall. Through Jakamba's strong opposition to Christianity, the play reveals that Western religion and social customs continue to exploit and divide Kenyans after independence. The title deed is a symbol of Kigunda's pride, manhood, and independence. In Kigunda's home, on one of the walls there hangs a framed title deed for 1.5 acres of land, indicating its importance to his identity. His small piece of land represents his hard-won freedom and dignity. For Kigunda, the title deed is tied to his masculinity. When he loses it, it feels like a symbolic castration. His daughter's exploitation by a wealthy man's son is similar to Kigunda's own economic exploitation by the elite. When Kigunda decides to mortgage his land to finance a Christian-style wedding, at Kiwe's urging, he is pressured into using the title deed as collateral at Kiwe's bank. This act marks his lowest point. He betrays his principles, people, and independence. By giving up his land to satisfy the expectations of the capitalist class, he accepts their claim that his own marriage, religion, and traditions are inferior. The fragility of Kigunda's independence is subtly shown when a rich guest causes the title deed to fall to the ground, a visual foreshadowing of his downfall. Later, when he succumbs to elite influence, he replaces the deed with a religious board. Christ is the head of this house. The unseen guest at every meal, the silent listener to every conversation, suggesting that he has surrendered his autonomy to foreign, capitalist, and religious control. Do like, share, and comment.